Okay, that's a little bit. Maybe just turn it off.
You can also do the, if you do the virtual background and take off the green screen, that will.
Yeah, it won't let me take it off.
It won't let you take it off.
Yeah. I mean, I could come back on. I can do a quick update and come back on.
No worries. I think we're good to go. We're starting off.
Okay.
Okay. So thank you guys for being here. Thank you everyone who's streaming live right now. We're going to begin. So, bienvenidos a todos. Thank you for joining us virtually in the comfort of your homes. My name is Useche. I'm a senior in the Communications Design department at Pratt, and I'll be the moderator for this Latinx Creatives Panel. With me is Erika Harrsch, Travieso, Yara Travieso, Ramon Tejeda, Hernán Ayala, Zuli Segura, and Pratt's president, Francis Bronnett. Un poco de historia sobre el motivo de este panel. Students of color often find themselves underrepresented in the classroom by professor selection and in the curriculum. Era mi meta antes de graduarme to have a conversation with professionals and students on the Latinx experience in the creative and fine arts industry within the physical space of Pratt. This panel brings the representation that lacks in our education to our devices. Me gustaría agradecer a everyone who made this event possible. The panelists, the Latinx Student Alliance, Jelani and the Black Alumni of Pratt, and the Communications Design Department, as well as the growing number of Latinx professionals who have sat down with me for interviews throughout the year. Ahora unas palabras de la Presidente de Pratt, Francis Bronnett. Thank you for being with us here today.
Well, good evening, everyone. As Maria has already said, I'm Francis Bronnett, and I'm the president of Pratt Institute, the very proud president. It's incredible to see you, and to not see many of you who are watching on YouTube, and welcome you for this really special event. Of course, I wish we were in a haptic space together, especially as we address critical issues affecting multiple communities. Thank you to Maria for organizing this panel discussion and for then finding a way to make sure that it actually happened virtually as we are living and working and learning apart. I do have to add that I know Maria from her amazing work for the McCann Scholarship on a communications piece that was challenging Columbus Day and indeed Christopher Columbus himself. It was brilliant, it was funny, it was provocative, it was inspiring and ultimately impact-oriented. Ask her about it one day. Events like tonight's panel are extremely important to recognize the contributions, the impact, the innovation, and unique perspectives that Latinx creatives have brought to advance the arts. Of course, we can't ever take for granted a commitment to equity and inclusion, but here we see it as fundamental to enhancing the educational experience, to inspire creative professionals, and for all of us to make significant contributions to society through all of our work. So I'm proud to share just a few of the updates that highlight the ways that Pratt's creating a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive environment. So we have a Center for Equity and Inclusion. It's housed under the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. That office started almost 2 years ago. Works closely with student leaders, especially last year to establish Pratt's Latinx Student Alliance, which is a supporter of tonight's panel discussion. So the group provides some very important spaces, safe spaces, programming, and a community for Latinx identifying students and other students who express any interest in the culture and has regular meetings to discuss Latinx customs, traditions, artists, and events. In addition, our admissions office has expanded its outreach to recruit more Latinx students. It's actually one of the fastest growing groups we have on the campus. And I'm proud to say that institutional advancement has secured more scholarship funding for underrepresented students. In terms of representation in the classroom, Human Resources is working with deans and chairs and search committees to recruit more underrepresented students, faculty, and staff. And you should know that of our 6 deans, 1 is from Puerto Rico, 1 is from Cuba, and 1 is from Brazil. I think that's starting to Yeah, amazing. And lastly, our Center for Teaching and Learning is working with all the faculty on inclusive pedagogy, managing diverse classrooms, and designing curricula that include representation of diverse creatives. I cannot tell you how important these initiatives are. I thank you all for being part of them. I'm glad to share them with you this evening. And thank you so much. And I'm about to transfer to the other side into the audience and leave you with this extraordinary panel. Again, to all of you and to Maria, thank you very much.
Thank you for your kind words, President Francis. It means a lot to have you be a part of this event and now watching from YouTube. So now let's continue off with some introductions. Ahora vamos a conocer a nuestros panelistas. So empezando con Zuli. Just state your name and yeah, who you are.
Hi. Hola, mi nombre es Zuli. I'm Zuli. I'm from San Juan, Puerto Rico, and right now I'm in Florida. But my practice. Typically I deal more with product and web design, and on the side I kind of like to explore stuff like screen printing and Rizzo. And so while I'm at that work, I like to do more web stuff, and then on the side I like to actually do things with my hands. So yeah.
Nice. Now going with chat.
Hi everyone, hola. So my name is Travieso. I am originally from Miami, but my mom is Venezuelan and my dad's Cuban. And I make participatory architectural public art projects that try to reinforce social bonds in our public spaces. And I also do a lot of research around the built environment and social justice issues. And thank you, Maria, for inviting me to be part of this panel.
Thank you. Okay, now Yara. Oh, hold on, you're muted. Okay,
Hi, everybody. My name is Yara Travieso, and I'm actually Chat's sister. Actually, I have an idea because I don't have a background. Hold on 1 second.
This is going to be great. I'm sure it is. Perfect.
Is it right way? Is it written the right way? Okay, great. My name is Yara Travieso. That's a poster made by Ryan Hartley Smith. And I'm a writer, director, choreographer, and filmmaker. And like Chat, we grew up in Miami. My mom is Venezuelan, my dad's Cuban, and I live in Brooklyn, New York. But I am actually currently in Miami with my parents in my childhood bedroom.
Nice. And now Hernán.
Hey, hola. My name is Hernán Ayala. I am a designer and artist, currently working as like a album cover designer or single artwork designer at a label, but I also work with Sabroso Projects, which is our art and design practice that me, Antonio, and Diego created together. I'm in Ridgewood, by the way, New York, and I'm from Puerto Rico. I think.
Nice.
Did I say that already? No, it's all good.
You can never say it too many times.
Yeah.
All right, Erika.
Hi, hola, my name is Erika Harrsch. I'm originally from Mexico, but I've been 19 years living in New York and creating. I'm a multimedia artist creating projects. I started in New York actually creating projects that were based on women empowerment and identity. So little by little, obviously, I realized that I'm an immigrant. I mean, it's not that I didn't realize at first, but it really took my whole identity as an artist to talk about immigration, and not only my own circumstance, but the circumstance of so many immigrants, and immigration basically tinted a decade of my projects.
Thank you. And now Ramon.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Maria, again. I should say hola todo el mundo, básicamente, if we go to the Spanglish. My name is Ramon Tejeda, and I am a designer and an educator. I live in Providence, Rhode Island. I teach at the Rhode Island School of Design. I used to teach at Pratt, so I'm very familiar with Pratt and the campus. And I tend to do a lot of work these days around the ideas of what I call a responsible expansion. Some people talk about within the umbrella of decolonizing design. But I'm really sort of interested in how we sort of push design out of its comfortable little zone and its comfortable narrative of European privilege and all of that, and really start thinking about making work coming from different places. And I'd love to collaborate with a lot of people on doing this, because I just have one little brain, and this requires a lot of thinking and a lot of other people's ideas and input. So it's fascinatingly incredible to be on a panel full of Latinx designers. I've never been on a panel like this before. So amazing. Thank you, Maria, again.
Thank you for being here. Okay, so we're going to begin with questions for each of our panelists, starting with Erika. Erika, your projects, United States of North America, unites the Canadian, US, and Mexican passports. This piece expands the boundaries of these individual countries, questions the concept of nation, reflects on the NAFTA treaty, and raises a conversation about immigration. How has Latin America been a source of inspiration for your work?
I would like to show some images. I do it now?
Yes, go for it.
Okay. Oh God, I'm not saying that.
You got this. Technical difficulties are welcomed here.
Here.
There you go. We're following you.
All right. So I'm going to talk about 3 different projects that I've been working with, that I work with, that definitely sort of created the path of me talking about immigration. First, I did a project with butterflies that talk about women that migrated to New York, and they were from many different countries, and talking about identity as female. After doing all those projects about female and identity and butterflies, I wanted to talk about the monarch butterfly, which is a symbol of my own Mexicanity. And that was Eros Thanatos. This project is a multidisciplinary installation.
Hold on, Erika, sorry, just a second. We can't really see anything on the screen, it's all black. So maybe exit full screen mode. Apologies for interrupting.
It's interesting, hold on a second.
Yeah, I don't think you need to go to full screen. If you just share the PDF, should be okay.
Okay. Do you see it now?
Yes, perfect, stay there.
Okay, so this was pretty much the second project I did on immigration. This project talks about the monarch butterfly and also about environmental issues, identity, and migration. So it's a recreation of the monarch sanctuary in Michoacán, Mexico. I don't know if you guys are familiar about this fantastic natural phenomena that the monarch butterflies travel all the way from Canada, crossing by United States and going to Mexico to a specific area in the highland forest of Michoacán, Estado de Mexico, where they do migration and they do hibernation there. So this video installation is a set of 60,000 recreation of these monarch butterflies printed on a polycarbonate substrate material, die cut. And then there's a video with sound. I went to the sanctuary of the monarchs and recorded the actual sound of hundreds of thousands of butterflies flying, that you don't really think that they create a sound, but they do create a sound when there are so many butterflies. I came with Edmund Mooney, a sound artist from Brooklyn, and we recorded the sound, and I filmed the butterflies, and then this installation lived. So with this monarch butterfly project, I started to travel in many, many different countries, in biennials, museums, different exhibitions. And it was a fascinating response to how every single person, every single culture respond to culture and immigration. And what was fascinating for me is that this was pretty much something that opened up an endless project of immigration. When I was filming in the Sanctuary of the Monarchs, I was going through the crazy conundrums of immigration and the visas. And then actually I decided to create the Monarch Butterfly Passport. So this is part of Eros Thanatos that has been, as I said, represented and exhibited in many different venues and festivals, exhibitions. And then after doing the project of the Monarch Butterflies, I decided to create the United States of North America Passport. As a Mexican, I do have, obviously my identity as a Mexican cannot be vanished, but I've been accumulating different identities. I've lived in Italy, in Germany, in Mexico, in different states, partially in Sao Paulo, in Brazil, and United States for the last 18 years. So for me, this transnational sort of constantly finding the identity became a voice. So I created the passport of the United States of North America, that it's an installation, a participatory installation that people actually fill a form, like a passport form, that entitles the people to actually spin a wheel of fortune and eventually become a citizen of this fictitious utopian country. So it's like a passport office. People engage in this, activate the piece itself, and they can actually win by spinning the wheel of fortune, win the passport. This as well has been exhibited in many different countries, in different settings, museums, and festivals, biennials. And I function as the passport officer that gives people the opportunity to have this passport. It's fascinating how this touches people, because normally we think that only illegal citizens are because they don't have the opportunities. But I also went through a very difficult circumstance that I was about to stay undocumented. So this project talks about many different circumstances in which or how people by accident, by circumstance, by need become undocumented or need the possibility to a passport. This was a fascinating installation that was at El Paso, actually a few meters or a few blocks away from the actual Santa Fe Bridge in El Paso Street, that it's pretty much where most immigrants cross on a daily basis. So you can see at the end of this photograph, the bridge, the round canopy, that's precisely the crossing. And this was a pop-up sort of passport office where this installation intertwined somehow in the urban weaving, in the urban tapestry, with all the needs for undocumented and not documented people that have families on the other side of the street, basically on another country. So this project has been in many different places. And after that, I kept on doing other projects about immigration, but my most recent is a project called Under the Same Sky We Dream, Bajo el Mismo Cielo Soñamos, that it's a video installation that recreates a center for undocumented minors at the border. I did this project in 2014, right after we saw that exodus of undocumented, unaccompanied minors. And in this project, I mixed the DREAM Act and the detention centers, because it was at the moment of the possibility that the DREAM Act was going to be passed, that would give these children the possibility to have an immediate path to citizenship. So the project is a video installation, but also has a book that documents precisely the border at El Paso Juarez, Ciudad Juarez and El Paso border over the course of 5 years. This is the result of the installation. The actual mattresses, the actual floor pads are the same pads that a company in North Carolina manufactures for the detention centers. They only sell to detention centers, private incarceration system. You have the blankets and you have the book. The video is projected on a screen that has the shape of United States and Mexico border, and it's an endless time lapse of the clouds from dawn to sunset at the border of El Paso and Mexico. The sound element, are you still listening to me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I just suddenly saw it kind of froze. And the video, the video is accompanied by a sound component that it's sung by Mago Herrera, and we created together a song that it's taken by exact fragments of the DREAM Act, the Bill of Congress that never passed. And the lyrics of the song are exactly as the DREAM Act. And this is like the voice of a mother. It's very compelling, very powerful. While you see the book, while you see the video, you listen to this magnificent voice singing with a very, very crass and dry text of the DREAM Act as a mother that sings to the lost children. And this is part of the book that accompanies the song. The same lyrics are created and are displayed on the books, accompanying the cadence of the song as poetry, as visual poetry. And the image that you see below, it's the first image that was out in 2014 of the detention centers. There were only 4 reporters that were allowed to be there. So this is a little bit of what I've been doing.
Wow, amazing. Thank you.
And yes,
so much.
obviously, yeah, being a Latin American woman in the United States, that definitely shaped my, not only my identity, but my voice as an artist, as a creative. When I realized that I was an immigrant, that I was one of all the people that come to United States and try to find a path, and definitely that shapes completely who you are. That became my own voice. So in that sense, yes, to your original question.
My original question. Thank you, Erika, so much for taking us on that journey through your work and how beautiful it was constructed and showing us every bit of it. Now moving on to Chat. Chat, you create participatory architecture that reinforces social bonds in our public spaces and interrogates the history and policies that have shaped and our built environment. In the Boogie Down Booth projects, you constructed units with seating and lighting that play music that originated in the Bronx. How did you work with residents that you initially didn't have connections to?
Yeah, so I will also share my screen so people can see what the Boogie Down Booth looks like. Also, can you all see this?
Yes.
Is good? Okay, great. Also, it's really fun to be on a panel with Yara. This is the first time that sibling panel happening here with us, so that's a lot of fun. So the Boogie Down Booth, so to answer your question, and kind of the short way to answer the question, but I'll kind of click through these pictures, is that through the work that I do, I always try to work closely with the communities that are most impacted by the work. And that takes a form of working with residents, with community organizations, with small businesses, local businesses, workers, young people. And the Boogie Down Booth is no exception. I come into every project without any assumptions, without assuming that I know best, but actually trying to come to a project with, an openness to learn, because the project is informed by the people who live there. So this project came about the first Boogie Down Booth, and the Boogie Down Booth has been a multi-year project. There are 4 Boogie Down Booths. This is a picture of the very first one that I did in collaboration, or part of a fellowship that I did with the Design Trust for Public Space. Their organization based in New York City. And I was a fellow, a participatory design fellow was my role. And essentially what that meant, the project that we were working on was called Under the Elevated. And we were looking at ways to improve spaces under elevated transit infrastructure. And my role as the participatory design fellow was to go and make kind of community connections. And the way I approached that was try to find organizations that are doing, and grassroots groups that are doing things in their communities to already improve these spaces, right? Because people are doing things all the time. And I just wanted to build off and use this project as a way to kind of leverage the work that people were already doing. So the Boogie Down booth came out as a way to kind of cover up the noise from the train. So this is in the South Bronx on Southern Boulevard. This is the 2-5 train. And I partnered with an organization called the Women's Housing Economic Development Corporation that does a lot of really great work. They provide affordable housing in the Bronx. They provide small business and economic development services and youth development services. And one of the things that came out of this project was, well, you know, in the meantime, obviously, what really needs to happen is that the trains need to have better wheels, that they're not screeching, and but in the meantime, how can we cover up that noise? And what we did, exactly what Maria said, was we provided, the booth has music, so speakers up here that play music that all originates in the Bronx. So we did a number of workshops out on the street, I interviewed a bunch of people along this commercial corridor, and this is the project that came out of it. I also collaborated, so there are other fellows on the project, one of whom was Neil Donnelly, who's a graphic designer. So he did the graphics that you see here, but as you can see in that little icon, the booth, the canopy has lighting, it has music, and all the music, you know, if you don't know, you should know that, you know, the Bronx is where hip hop was born, but also Celia Cruz lived in the Bronx, Tito Puente, La Lupe, like all these amazing musicians. So mambo and salsa were like really nurtured there. So we wanted to celebrate that. And, you know, we had celebrations, and then this is the second version of the Boogie Down booth. This time working with young people in the community to paint a mural. This one also had a community bulletin board. This is just one subway stop north of the first Boogie Down booth. And yeah, I continued the collaboration with Wetco each time, you know, expanding the musicians. This is a band that is playing Garifuna music, which is Afro-Honduran music. And, you know, this is the third Boogie Down booth in the Melrose neighborhood. Yeah, I just realized you're going to have a little cameo soon. There's a people painting. This is Yara dancing salsa. This is Bobby Sanabria in the background, who's one of the co-directors of the Bronx Music Heritage Center. So one of a satellite organization that's connected to Wetco. And then this is the latest Boogie Down booth, which is actually still up. And it's been up for almost a year now. And this is off the 170 stop and Jerome Avenue in the Bronx. And this one, again, we had people paint. So to answer your question too, like how do you form these connections? Well, it's years of relationship building, of, you know, just showing up, going to events, talking to people. And, you know, I always tell people just kind of, how would you want someone to approach you? You know, so it's just kind of just talking to people as human beings, you know, like making community. So, and hopefully these projects continue that tradition. One fun thing about this latest Boogie Down booth, as you can see, has two sides to it. And that backside becomes kind of like a stage. And as you can see in this image, this is the subway stop. So people would line up along the stairs to see the concerts. So it was a lot of fun. So yeah, that's the Boogie Down booth.
Amazing. It's really great to see. I remember seeing it during Young Arts Week, and I'm seeing it here again. Great.
Thank you.
All right, and the next one is a combined question for Zuli and Hernán. You both made student projects that became real in the world. Zuli, you created the Latinx Design Directory, a directory that provides exposure for Latinx people in the design industry. Hernán, you created Sabroso Projects, an art and design practice from Puerto Rico that makes work around decolonization. Starting with Zuli and the Latinx Design Directory, followed by Hernán and Sabroso Projects, can you describe what inspired the projects and what it means for your personal practices?
Thanks for that. So the Latinx Design Directory started with me coming to grad school, and prior to grad school, like I was a marketing student and did a lot of accounting and finance, and I was not very happy. And then I shifted gears to design, and but I went straight into like working at an agency. So I never had that opportunity to like do passion projects and think of design as like a way to express myself. I think I thought of it as more of just a job. And so when I got to grad school at MICA, the MFA program, I decided that I wanted to obviously like establish myself as like a web designer, product designer, but I knew that I wanted to take this opportunity to explore themes of like displacement, like cultural identity, and telling like more untold narratives within the Latinx community. And so I'm actually gonna share my screen now. So the first like chance that I got to do that really was through No Licho, which was a publication that I did towards like the end of my first year. It was essentially like a month-long project where that would hopefully maybe inform my thesis. And I interviewed a designer from Colombia, Katy Huertas, and then an illustrator, designer, Bianca Gonzalez, from Puerto Rico. And basically I wanted to do this because I kind of just wanted to like talk to them and like hear about their experiences and how like what led to these beautiful projects that they've been working on. And I think through this project, I kind of essentially realized that there was so much like beauty and like just stepping back and like listening to others like journeys, and also giving them like a platform and being able to like showcase this magazine to my MICA community and bringing in a lot of like representation that I didn't see amongst my faculty and my cohorts. Really, I found it very humbling. And so I knew that I wanted to take that with me to thesis, and that's what informed the Latinx Design Directory. And this is essentially it. And I wanted, when I was making this directory, I did it because I wanted to create a space that I felt that I didn't have in my immediate design community. And I also wanted to really flex like my product and web design skills. And I thought that by making an online directory, it would be like the best way to like highlight these people, these individuals. And you know, when I was looking at existing directories, although it was like incredible that they existed, I looked at it as like, well, what else comes after existing? Like, how are we trying to help this community? And so I thought about, well, let me build like a really robust filtering system. So if I'm like somebody who lives in Baltimore and I want somebody who's from like, you know, like Puerto Rico or like Ecuador or something like that, then like I can hire somebody. And whether it's like a podcast trying to like book an episode with a Latinx designer, or somebody wanting to like book someone for a panel, something like that, that this would be like the place. And it's been really, really incredible just like seeing this thing grow. And I'm really excited to continue working on it. Every single day I see like submissions, and it's been really fun. Another thing that I wanted to create for this directory was like editorial features. And this came from like kind of getting tired of reading about the same type of designers and the same type of work in like design publications. And this was like my way of trying to bring in new perspectives and new voices in the design and tech world. And I really can't wait to do more of this once I graduate and like I can do like a dive into like properly interviewing these people, finding more talent. And yeah, I'm really excited about doing that. But that's, and what I think the question was about like my personal practice too, like just the fact that I can do what I like love to do, like 9-to-5 job, and then after I leave that, be able to have this like side project that I can just like throw myself into, and also like uplift others in the community. I'm really excited about doing that.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. And that design directory, the link is in the description if anyone wants to send in an application. And now, Hernán.
Hello. So as Maria said, Sabroso is an art and design practice created by myself, but also created by two of my best friends and brothers, Antonio del Valle Lago and Diego Sanchez, where we basically create projects that question the politics and issues of Puerto Rico. And those things that happen in Puerto Rico are basically inspirations to these different projects. And one example, which I'm actually gonna share the screen right now, is the decolonized Republic of Puerto Rico. Let me know if you can see it.
You're good to go.
Cool. So basically, it's a performative installation in which participants engage in a process on receiving their Puerto Rican identity in the form of a passport. So kind of similar to Erika, which is obviously an amazing project. But this one is about imagining kind of a new reality in which Puerto Rico is finally free from colonialism. So basically what we do is we have an installation where people can receive their passports, obviously. They fill out a form like any other passport office, and then they receive their passport on demand in person. We also talked about creating collateral items such as the Puerto Rican flag. What would it look like if it was a decolonized republic? And obviously, like, when you go to another country, what's the first thing that kind of represents their whole identity other than the flag is the currency design. If you go to Canada and you compare the US dollar and the Canadian dollar, it's plastic, and then the US dollar is green, obviously. Everyone knows about that, but each country has their own identity. So we thought about doing that for Puerto Rico by using different people that represent the history of Puerto Rico, people that fought for Puerto Rico's independence. And then for questions that we were arising with this project was, are you tired of modern American colonialism? Do you believe in the preservation of culture? And me and Antonio had this conversation of what we could be called, and Antonio thought of the word "new criollo," which basically means this word criollo is like a word we use for people that are in the Caribbean. So the new criollo is the new Creole and nuevo criollo, this new identity that is being created now for the people of Puerto Rico. And here you see some other photos of the installation. That's Antonio right there talking to someone who's actually applying for citizenship. And this is what the application kind of looked like. We asked, obviously, name, your date of birth, stuff like that, pretty basic stuff. And then it goes into sections where it dives in a little bit deeper into questions such as, do you believe in the preservation of culture? If you're bilingual, or does that cause you any problems? Are you tired of being an American citizen? Or are you tired of modern American colonialism? And then we go into the section where we wanted to give the opportunity to those who were applying to create their own constitution for the Republic. And I think a lot of people, they wrote very different things, but they all have like kind of the similar ideas. And for example, everyone wants the right for public health. Everyone wants the right for a better education system. And, it goes on to these kinds of things like separation of state and religion, and kind of eliminating all these things that kind of make Puerto Rico a colony. And it was pretty incredible to see the amount of responses from all these people while they were writing on the application, because everyone was kind of in that same world where they wanted the same things. And here's another photo of when people, we created a table where people could gather and, you know, fill out the form with themselves and kind of have that discussion with with each other, which was very interesting to see. And here, you know, part of the passport is you get your photo taken, and then we print it on a Polaroid, and we staple it on the passport. And here are some photos from this amazing photographer called Mari Robles. She's also known as Media Persona on Instagram. We wanted to include her in the exhibition by showcasing her photography, which she has taken over the years of different protests that have been happening in Puerto Rico. So here you have kind of like, while you're waiting in line, you can see kind of the progress that the people have made of, you know, fighting for their freedom, fighting for anything that they believed in. And I think it was a very powerful statement to have these photos up there for sure. You know, we stamp the passport and finally give them to the new citizen. And that's kind of it. I think also to answer the question, this to me, you know, for this practice to me, it means that I can like talk about important issues such as this one, like social and political issues, especially as a designer. And because, you know, we come from this industry where we're mostly working for big companies, advertising agencies or design studios or, you know, any other corporation. And our focus is usually to bring, you know, big brands to life. And, you know, sometimes that might feel wrong, or it just feels wrong. It doesn't really represent you. But, you know, at the same time, we need to get paid and survive. But, you know, by doing this kind of work with Sabroso, we understand that we have like this commitment as a design practice to keep pushing these ideas forward, because it isn't always about big brands or big corporations. It's about, you know, creating a community that you want to engage with and that you care about, and speaking about these things that we want hopefully to change in the future. So yeah.
Very true. Thank you so much for sharing. And
thank you for having me.
It was great to see the whole beginning of it to the end and the impact that it had. All right, now moving on to Yara. You are a writer, director, filmmaker, choreographer, and educator. Young creatives sometimes feel confined to categories like their ethnicity, identity, and creative discipline. As a person who is constantly evolving with your practice, can you talk about how you found your individual voice and how your voice has evolved when working with a team?
Hi, everybody. Yes, thank you, Maria. So my name is Yara. You say it like yada, 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 just in case. Yeah, I think this is a really great question. I obviously take on a lot of roles, but for me, I really just make these works, and the names of what I do are necessary in order to communicate that to venues or places. For example, my work would not normally be in a gallery, so I have to say filmmaker, director, choreographer, but I really just make strange films and performances. So I think altogether the way that I found this identity was really following my nose, like following my practice from the inside out versus from the outside in. And what I mean by that is really leaning into what was calling me to tell the stories I wanted to tell. So really it's about the stories that I'm interested in telling, and then those stories take on different lives and different forms. I found out early on that the built environment was not created for me and in the way I expressed myself or the way I really existed. And I had a really hard time in the dance world and the film world, really finding my voice and finding my community in any of these spaces, both male dominated and, you know, in theater and in film. I never really felt safe or welcomed with my ideas or even within like my body and taking up space. So I decided that if this environment and this world was not created or built for me to be, you know, living through the best potential I can live as a vessel to tell these stories, then I would create a whole new universe for me and my community to create and tell these big wild stories in these new forms. So in a lot of ways, the work is genreless on purpose. It's genreless to really give ourselves space to tell new stories. And it's also genreless to give the characters in the stories the same complexity as the form they take on. So I'll take you through a little bit. Let's see, I'm gonna try to do this screen share. Okay. Are you seeing? Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so this is La Medea. This is a made-for-camera musical. It's a live variety TV show, Latin disco pop, live broadcasted, shot, edited, and broadcasted all in real time. We did it with a live studio audience. So if you can imagine, those of you out there that are familiar with Sábado Gigante, imagine like a mixture of Sábado Gigante if it was live, so SNL, mixed with just like every possible absurd trope of telenovela, of a talk show, of all the sort of variety show elements, in sort of wrapped up in this wild musical landscape. So we had a live studio audience and they participated as, you know, theater goers, but really they were there as our Greek chorus and our film extras. I'll show you a little bit about what I mean. In general, the story that I really wanted to tell was kind of a rebellious take on the original myth. La Medea is really based on Euripides' myth of Medea, which is the most prolific myth in history. It's been recreated more than any other Greek myth and in Western culture. And if you really sort of take on the ideas of La Medea or Medea, the original myth, and how that original myth has really been seen through the lens of history and theater, it is often looked at as a feminist myth. And when you really get into it and read about it, the myth is about a foreign woman, an immigrant that in her hometown was a queen, but she essentially murders her brother and betrays her father to run away with Jason, a Greek warrior. And so in all of that, the story opens with this very aggressive, hysterical foreign woman that is livid because she's being kicked out of Corinth, where she now resides with her now partner. And she's so angry that she wants to take revenge because her husband has left her with a younger princess. She's famous because she murders her children. That's the bottom line. That's why we all know her. She was incredibly violent, and she sort of like took revenge upon, it's a very layered story, but she took revenge on Jason, her husband, I guess, and because she wasn't treated as a citizen because she was a woman and she was a foreigner, so she murders her two sons. So for me, this story has for a long time been seen as a feminist lens, and it was so problematic on so many levels. Here you have a foreign woman that is really sort of framed in that idea of hysterical, violent, dangerous, melodramatic, over the top, jealous, and she really embodied a lot of these archetypes that oftentimes Latin women in Western media are often embodying, this sort of intense, too much, melodramatic, dangerous, you can't trust, dark magic, evil. And that really resonated with me in so many ways. And so for me, I really wanted to not recreate the myth, but I really wanted to dismantle it. I wanted to explode it. I wanted to kind of be a rebellious teenager with it and create a whole new world for her. So essentially what this is, it's an infinite portrait of what she could have been. So I multiplied her through camera, through stage, through screens, through mirrors, and also through multiple genres. So she exists through music, through film, through cinema, through theater. And you'll see a little bit, I'm gonna play the trailer. Let's see if you can hear it.
Ladies and gentlemen, audiencia nocturna, live in our studio, we bring you the mother, the warrior, the foreigner. La Medea! I left my country so you could live, love. I left my family so you could live, love. I'm gonna do this deed, and when the deed is done, you'll be a widower and childless man. Not a Greek woman! Who is it? Tie on my feet, live on my knees. Otherwise, we will die. Your love lost today. Tell me how does it feel? Now your world will come
So that was sort of trailer version of this performance. Let me see if we can go to the next slide. So that was more of my immersive work. The other thing about La Medea that is really interesting is that we live broadcasted it worldwide. So we have people tuning in from all over the world to watch this woman essentially like break all kinds of expectations through the lens, and the people watching at home can interact. So if you're watching the live broadcast, you could send in questions, comments that would eventually make their way into the script live. So that's interesting thing to know in this time where live streaming has become this new form of storytelling. We're really playing with that instantaneous idea of how do I make film feel like theater, and how do we make theater feel like film? And a lot of what we were doing, we had asked our live studio audience to participate as our Greek chorus and essentially our film extras for free. So that was another aspect of it, really sort of exposing the idea of filmmaking to theater as another way of, another layer of vulnerability for the characters. So speaking of filmmaking, this is a more traditional film that I created a couple years ago. It was written by Teo Castellanos. He's a Puerto Rican playwright, incredible, dear friend. He wrote a story based on his family, and then I rewrote it for the screen with him. The original story was really meant for to be told through the point of view of him and his brothers and his uncles. And there were two female characters in the beginning, and there was one in the beginning, one at the end, were really fascinating to me and really beautiful, which were his mother and his grandmother. And so when we took the film from a feature length film to a short film, I wanted to rewrite it through the point of view of the two women in the story, which were his mother and his grandmother. So, you know, when we're talking about how did my, Maria, your question work, how does my work shift with collaboration? And I think a lot of what I learned early on was, I love this picture so much. I think a lot of what we learned early on was if we're not going to abide by what's expected of us in form, so if we're going to be genreless, if we're going to start telling new stories, then we want our creative experience or collaborative experience to also invite a new way of working. So generally the director on stage or on a film set tends to have this there tends to be very hierarchical roles on these spaces. And although the work does come from one person usually, so if I'm creating the work, wrote it and directed it, surely a lot of the ideas are generated from one place, but the way that we collaborate and we work is not traditional to the stereotypical film set or a theater set that has a lot of patriarchy traditions to it. So the way we work is often really collaborative, present. We have conversations as a team. For example, in this film, the main character was pregnant and she had never been pregnant before. She was young. And as a team, we all had a conversation, and, you know, my team was Latinx predominantly and predominantly women, we all had shared, men and women, experiences with child's birth and what that was like. And so everyone together, we would kind of create the feeling of a theater rehearsal with the film grip and sound person. And with that, we sort of created the same environment that you would have in theater, but in film. So again, it's sort of playing with crossing genres in the making of and in the final product in order to break out of the traditional expectations of these kind of patriarchal structures of hierarchies. This is just a quick little scene. Hold on, I'll show you this one.
Mommy? Mami, déjame me muera. Debemos dejar que las maravillas fluyan y ser testigo de su magnificencia. No hay tal cosa como eso. Las olas romperán, el sol se pondrá de nuevo mañana. No es tragedia cuando aquellos que amamos deciden partir. Deja que me muera.
So that film, I loved making this film so much because the creation of it was so beautiful and holistic and how we all collaborated together. But the film itself really embodies so much that I find so important in the works that we're making, which is really telling the story through the ancestral female lens. So in this film, it really took on a lot of the stories and the traditions of Santeria, and really sort of thought about how do we tell this and not in not a gratuitous way or exploit the beauty that is that practice, and how do we tell it in the way that it's almost like it's as casual as, you know, café con leche in the kitchen, because that's where the altar is, and it's as important as mom's whispers because that's how important it is. And so much of it was really capturing the point of view of abuela and mom and you in a house, and then also really talking about the creation of life through these women and the conversations that they would have, but also woven between that was a magical realism. So in that part of the film, one character is dying, another character is being born, and the house becomes flooded when her water breaks. So there is so much about that tradition of magical realism that is so prevalent in these works, even when they are very simple and quiet in narrative. And then lastly, this is El Ciclón, which is the poster behind me. And El Ciclón, I did it with Young Arts, who is here in Miami. And I wanted to bring it up because that's how me, Chat, got together with Maria, because we're all alums of the program. And they commissioned this piece to take over their campus, which is essentially a Miami city block. And the beautiful thing about this project was it was like a free event for the community. This is where I was raised and I grew up. And I really wanted to create a work that embodied this experience of growing up in a very tropical space and home, and the experiences that we had growing up here and in community. So this was right after the hurricane had actually hit in 2017 that I wrote it. And we took all the debris from the hurricane and created a big set. The lighting for the piece was, if you see those cars, the headlights of those cars plus other additional lighting. And sort of, we created again a live filmscape. It was projected on the Young Arts building. And so it was kind of like watching a film outdoors being made live. It was a camp horror film. So you can see here the making of camera woman shooting the actor up on the car and then that being projected. I'm just gonna play a quick little scene.
You're all wet, aren't you? You must be freezing. You better come with me and get yourself out of those wet clothes of yours.
Deteriorate from here as the storm continues to move toward land.
How can you say say you didn't see it coming? How can you say you didn't see it coming?
So let's see, let's get out of this. So that's essentially the wildness of the work and really sort of embracing the non-genre and the complexity of the characters within the form.
Amazing, Yara, how you're able to have so many dimensions to your work. It really is breathtaking. Okay, now Ramon. One of the opening lines in your collaborative Decolonizing Design Reader states, "As a designer, I have come to terms with the fact that what and who design history has been interested in canonizing up to this point does not reflect me, my cultures, my values, and many of the tenets that make me a citizen, a designer, and a teacher. I don't see myself reflected in much of the narrative of design, not in the history, the theory, the practitioners, or the outcomes. During your interview, you discussed the importance of decolonizing design and unlearning. How do you use education as a tool?"
So just for clarification, I mean, I sort of, decolonizing is such a huge term that literally has a myriad of definitions. And I think the way that I use it is sort of my own definition. And you know, I sort of think about it, and I wrote some notes here. So I think about it as sort of unearthing and shifting the glance, decentering, giving agency, being vulnerable, making mistakes, ideation, thinking about our communities, and not so much about design. And when I talk about design, I talk about capital D design, that thing that it's some of us do because we have to pay bills for, but at some point it breaks you and you have to make certain decisions. I was born in the Dominican Republic. I grew up in New York. So it is very, very painful and annoying, to be honest with you, to still think that in New York City, one of the most diverse cities in the world, I feel like design still is so resistant towards different perspectives and people that are really reacting to their neighborhoods. Because if you live in New York, if you don't have contact with a Hispanic or an African American or somebody from another place in the world, I don't know what neighborhood you live in. So a lot of it is really, for me, is about sort of like the visibility aspect plays a big role. I think the idea of like how education can be used as a tool. I ended up being a teacher. I don't know how I ended up being a teacher, but I've always loved sharing. So for me, teaching is about sharing and collaborating. I used to be in theater, and then I left it for literally a lot of the same reasons. Sort of there was, as Yara said, there's no space there for other alternative perspectives or other stories that are not the same three stories or Shakespeare. With all due respect, it's like that's one perspective. So for me, the way teaching is serving right now, and this is kind of in flux right now, and I'm totally fine with being messy and fluxy right now. And I think this whole COVID-19 is going to make education shift in profound ways that we have no idea. So there's a lot of discomfort, but I'm comfortable with it. Education is a tool that allows us to have conversations, to be imaginative, and to develop divergent ideas. And sort of that's how I've sort of been able to frame it, the most recent version of it. But I've really been interested in really thinking about shifting away from the quote unquote canon that we are instilling in education, particularly art and design, because that's sort of the world that I'm in. I think it's really problematic to end up realizing that at some point that you have spent a lot of money, in the case of those of us in this country, to never see yourself reflected. And the fact that we were already colonized once, and then the education has colonized us again to think that what is good is Europe, as much as there are really good parts of it. What is valuable is European, and a lot of the work and the culture of a lot of the places we come from, our parents come from, are relegated to some sort of anthropological experiment that shows up at the Met. And it's in some little case, but it's never featured or it's never seen as sort of this very valid piece of visual work. Right now, for me, it's like saying the Bauhaus is not the beginning of design. It never was, it never should have been. It should be contextualized. People for thousands of years before anybody in the Bauhaus got to it were making works of design. And I start to think about thinking that the design that I'm interested in engaging with students is lowercase design. I just wrote a thing about an article, and I was just like, for me, the work that I'm interested in making and the work that I'm interested in students making or encouraging students to make is lowercase design, which may not be the design that a lot of us studied. That thing that we study, for me, sometimes I think it's a box, and maybe we need to put it away in the bookshelves and try to come up with something else rather than try to emulate and replicate this thing that doesn't even have space for a lot of us. That's really damaging in for people like start to think about. So a lot of it also came out after the elections for me and having to come to terms, having to go into a classroom. I was teaching at Pratt in the grad program and I couldn't, we all cried for like 3 days, I swear, and realizing that I could not propagate a particular narrative anymore, that I don't look like that. So why am I sitting here giving so much space to a narrative that doesn't even make space for me? So in many ways, it's something that it's a point creates a little bit of a friction because, you know, I have to teach the tradition of design. But again, what is the tradition? If you start to pull it apart, it's like this colonial tradition that is a problem. So when Hernán was saying this colonial, I'm like, I can't even believe that we're still using that word. Like Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States. It's like, oh, like what decade are we still on? Like, let's move on from that language. So anyway, so I'm going to share with you, because I was not going to share anything, but I'm going to share some stuff. So I'm going to share with you my my desktop, because that's how I work these days. I love this messy thing. So you alluded to the decolonizing reader. So this is a Google Doc that I did. And really it came out of when I got hired to come up to RISD, I was teaching a class called Decolonizing Design, which, you know, no secret to anybody that knows me, is probably the most difficult class I've ever taught. I probably wasn't even completely prepared for it. It's a really complicated class. And I actually think that it's not even a class. It should be an idea that's embedded through curriculum. It should not be like, oh, this is an elective. So I decided to make this reader. I started with the reader. This is a variation of it. The one that I did for the class, it's a separate file because students started adding things to it. This is the one that lives out there in the world. It's an open source Google Doc that people can add things to. And it was just a way for me to try to figure out, like, what else, who should we be looking at? Who haven't we looked at? Who didn't, people in design pedagogy or design syllabus, who was never there, who was never mentioned. And a lot of these people are people that look like me, that look like a lot of us, complicated, interesting people. Some of them are incredibly intelligent people who have had incredible ideas that have always been at the margin. I'm thinking about, like, how do I bring that forth? So a lot of people, this sort of started for me with looking at Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's the TED Talk, the first TED Talk she did, the value of the danger of a single story. It was the first thing that one of the first talks she did before she was famous, world famous, because, you know, she wrote these incredible novels. And that sort of launched me into this sort of like summer-long investigation of like finding things. So it's unorganized, it's on purpose. It's like 58 pages, I think it's 51 pages of material. John Leguizamo's syllabus for Latin history for morons, which he posted on Instagram, and I was like blown away by it. I was just like, oh my God. So this idea of open source and sharing things, I think it's really important. I'm not hugging this. I wanted to resist this thing of like designers always like, it's my work, it's my job, I have to flash it. I'm like, I'm not interested in that. I'm sort of interested in community and sharing a lot. And maybe that's the Latino Dominican crazy family that I have thing of like sharing everything, and half the family's not even your family. They're just friends of your families for the last 50 years. So they're like your family. And you're like, wait, but it's so good. It turned into this version of it. The latest one, I was asked to create a printed version, and on purpose, like I made it, but it's useless because the links are not even active. The actual document is this thing here, this messiness, which I'm actually going to redo. So I was just really thinking about sort of like how, you know, like, again, like how do I make spaces where students, and even not just students, but the idea of unlearning is really difficult. Like, how do we all relearn, and who do we need to be looking at? Who do we need to be prioritizing? Do I look at Joseph Albers one more time? Or do I look at, I don't know, Celia Cruz? Like, Celia is like amazing, right? Do I look at Sábado Gigante? Thank you, Yara. You're like, oh my God, now I have Sábado Gigante in my head, right? Do I look at, this is one of the presentations that I did, do I look at Chespirito, right? Like, that I encounter, and I'm like, oh my God, I forgot about that. Like, I used to watch that show all the time when I was a kid, and really starting to think like about whose voice and story you're elevating. And if I constantly elevate the same 3 stories and the same 3 people, then we have a problem, because I start to think about the kids that come right after us, and the fact that we're still playing this game of like not reflecting who they are. And in the context of being at a school, being in a classroom, and not seeing yourself represented, I think it's really problematic. And it's something that I think education has to really, design education, I think is we're doing a better job, but I still think we have a lot of work to do. I think this particular moment, again, COVID, is going to really put that to the test, and really demand that people really shift and stop trying to be like, oh, I'm aspiring to shift. And then you spend 30 years aspiring. Like, how about let's start working and doing it, because it's sort of damaging. And then the last thing I have is, because I've been quote unquote colonized so much, I spend really a difficult time trying to figure out, like, what does design that comes out of this look like? And people always like, well, what does this design look like? I'm like, I don't know that I can pinpoint it for you, because it doesn't exist, because all we've been making is the same 3 sans serif based, like gridded, structured graphic design. And when it gets messy, everybody's like, well, that's just messy. I'm like, well, the last time I went to the DR, it was so messy, I lost it. Like, I'm like, oh my God, I can't. It's like, it's an incredible, amazing culture, and that's great. So these are just gifts of this. I didn't intend for these to be gifts. I love gifts. So this is sort of like trying to insert the Dominican into design. And I actually think of New Yorkino is probably the right term for me, because I came to the US when I was very young. So it's boiled down to like language and certain terms. Some of you may recognize some of these terms because they sort of go through different countries, and trying to see if I can insert that language and figure that out. But I think a lot of this is sort of like lives in that space of like, not just me educating students, but me educating myself, me educating my colleagues, me educating friends, people that I meet, a lot of these conversations. I'm really thinking of education as this really collaborative back and forth engagement, not just me giving you my knowledge. I may not even have all the knowledge you need to make the work you want to make. And then this happened 2 weeks ago. You all probably saw it. Thank you, New York Times. Concepcion de Leon wrote this piece in the T magazine, Dominican Models on the Rise. I literally like fell off my seat when I saw this. This is like the most gorgeous freaking thing I've seen in a long time. These Dominican models who are like, like redefining beauty, and just the idea of like, what does a Dominican woman or what does a Latin woman look like? These challenges, right? If you haven't seen it, you should look at this. It's pretty amazing. And Concepcion's piece is really amazing. It's funny because I just sent her a message on Instagram and she replied. I was like, oh my God. Just the idea, again, like trying to make spaces for other people and seeing yourself reflected, regardless of where you come from, within this continuum of what design is. I think it's super important. That's sort of where I'm interested in. Just that. Yeah.
Amazing, Ramon. And that's just such a perfect like fluid to the next question that's going to be opening up to all of you guys, which is, do you ever feel defined by your culture instead of your creative artistic role? So anyone that wants to answer, go for it.
I'll take a stab at that. I'll start. I've played the game of not being Latinx or Latino for a long time in design. I have a joke that I thought I was going to change my name to like Hans or something like that. Because, in design, art and design values Europe so much to the detriment of everybody else, that I felt I needed to play that role. And I think that I'm coming to terms with that. And that's a difficult thing to do, actually. So it's really amazing to be on a panel with people that are doing that. and sort of like have figured out their own ways, so that, again, you know, like you see a panel of all these awesome, beautiful faces looking at me, and I'm seeing your work, and I'm like, oh my God, I can do that, right? Like, you know, like that's like a huge amount of like incredible thing that you can give somebody. So trying to navigate and perhaps develop your own ways of doing it. But I don't think being Latino, or as I used to say, Hispanic, and you know, the language has shifted. We talked about this, Maria, like the language has shifted so much. It was it was Hispanic when I was growing up in New York, then it was Latino, then it became a bunch of other things. Now it's Latinx. And the first time I saw Latinx, I was like, that's a typo. What is going on here? And one of my friends was like, no, it's not a typo. I'm like, got it, okay. I just think now for me, it's about like, how do I bring that out? And how do I foreground that into my work and whatever, and even use it in a classroom to teach. So maybe I don't need to teach somebody that has been given too much space. I need to send them on vacation. Maybe they need to listen to Celia Cruz, you know?
Very true. Does anyone else want to take a stab at that question? Go, Erika.
Saying the fact of what shapes you, if your background, your culture, or the place you're living in, definitely for me, it's everything. There's undeniable that I'm Mexican, and having traveled and lived in 5 countries already. And but what really created my identity is, as Ramon says, being a Neoyorquina, and talk about that condition, because definitely that very, very difficult condition of immigration shapes you. It's undeniable. I mean, sometimes I said, it's very hard for us who come to another country to establish, to be good in your language, to develop your project, your life identity, your voice as an artist, plus keep on doing the whole thing of the conundrum of applying for visas, O1 visa, this visa, and being on the very thin line of being deported or being kicked out. And honestly, at the beginning, I was having a voice that was very universal. My first project was, funny enough, also about immigration, but talking about women from many different countries, female identity through sexuality and culture and background, which is, you know, composed by either ethnicity, religion, culture, your family, your country, where your upbringing, how it forms you and defines you. And but then I started to realize that my own personal status definitely had a voice. I was like anybody else that comes to a different country and immigration and migrate. Funny enough, I didn't have a name that is Latin. So first it was, this is very interesting how times change. First, Erika Harrsch helped me because it didn't define me almost 20 years ago to a very specific cultural background. So I could be from any place. But you know, it was a German name, but then I had a Latin accent and I had a whole different identity and cultural background. And now sometimes I'm even taken out from this Latinx sort of name because Erika Harrsch doesn't sound Latinx. And it's very interesting how the need of defining where you come from, what do you do, your ethnic identity, if you're a man, a woman from this country, from another country, is so important to give that tag. I've been always very against tagging, but it's fascinating that now, I mean, I do understand the Latinx name because I am a Latinx identity artist, because I'm from a Latin American country that lives, creates, and has been shaped in the United States. I do have now the American passport. So yes, I do consider myself a Latinx artist, but now my name doesn't fit. So I would say I should adopt my mother's last name and call myself Laura Sanchez Lara, maybe, and probably create an easier path for me to become a Latinx artist in the full identity.
But that presents, Erika, sorry, Maria, but that presents one of the big things about this, right? It's like, we're not a monolithic group of people, right? We're like this humongous, like diverse group of people coming from all over the place. There's no one Latinx person. Like our cultures are really complicated, and a lot of it has to do with colonialism, of course, and migration and immigration. So it's just recognizing all of that. And even the titles themselves sometimes just plug people into one thing. When within Latinx, I mean, every country has a variation. And within every country, there's many different groups of people as well, which sometimes don't even get their due because everybody gets plumped into one thing, right? So.
Yeah, very true, exactly. We're sometimes categorized unwillingly. All right, sorry, we're gonna move on to the next question, opening it up again to everyone. You all serve as inspiration for the next generation of Latinx students. Any advice for when they aren't seeing this representation in their professor selection or as leaders in their respective creative fields?
I can
go for it.
I can touch on that one. I really love working with young people, and on my sets, I often have children and often have a lot of younger female artists that are just so incredible, and I'm just so excited about the next generation. I'm so inspired all the time. I think that not seeing representation was something that really tore me up inside in my younger years. I remember being a young artist in high school. Once I went to college, I remember feeling so heavy. And so I actually really felt depressed because I felt like I could not imagine myself in the landscape. I could not see it. And I didn't understand how painful and how heavy that feeling was at the time, because I also was alone in that feeling. I was the only Latina in my year, my department at Juilliard. And I actually didn't even realize how Latina I was until I went to a conservatory like that. And then all of a sudden people were calling me chica, and walking down the street, they would be like, ay, ay, ay. It's like, what's happening? And I really had never experienced that because I really grew up in, Latinx or really diverse environment in Miami. And so that was really a shock to my system, and being self-aware in that way, all of a sudden, it felt similar the way that women do when you're catcalled in the street, where all of a sudden you're like, oh, they're trying to have a vagina, and you forget, and it's like this kind of strange self-awareness that you weren't inviting into your life. And so I think that really created an interesting introspection in those times where, as a young artist, you're really developing your creative voice and your sensibilities. And I also feel like not having any representation that I could really think of predominant images even in my history classes, my art history classes, of any Latinx female directors, choreographers, filmmakers, nothing that was really held up. And it was so lonely. I remember crying and calling my brother, crying, just being so alone. And I think the biggest thing that I took out of that was, okay, I will create space myself. And as I'm doing it, I will do it with the community. So I'm not alone in this. And there's got to be other people that feel this way. So I have to find them. So that was one big thing. I found my community of Latinx women of color that had the same fears. And, we would struggle so often in creating and developing our projects and getting our projects up off the ground too. And we really were there to help each other emotionally, logistically, to really be there, a network that was really fortifying the feeling of that doesn't exist, but we will help put it, and they do exist. Obviously, there's been amazing female filmmakers, Latinx female filmmakers and directors and choreographers, and all of them, they obviously do exist, but they're not held in the bigger canon of our sort of cultural history. And so that was something that was really painful. But I think part of it was, let's take that space and let's try to uplift those who came before us in our own work. And then let's also try to fill in that gap and be that for each other. And another thing was thinking about that space, that that non-representation is actually an opportunity, because I really believe that the next generation of artists are looking into what Erika was talking about too, which is, and I think all of us are touching on, which is this new kind of creative being that isn't necessarily held down by these binary or these very clear categories that are really meant for a capitalist system to profit off of us. So like, if we start to dismantle that as well, and we start to really embrace a whole new way of expressing our identity, which is infinite, if we really try to embrace and approach the room, like, my work is infinite and it's gonna take on different forms, as well as I am infinite. Where I come from is clear, and I will hold that up, and my ancestors, and put that in my work. But I myself can be anything and can create anything. And I think that is such an amazing opportunity to have. We're not going to be locked down by any image that is created of us, but instead we're going to be this complex, breathing, ever-evolving entity.
Can I jump in? Oh, sorry, Maria.
Go for it, chat. Go for it.
No, I just want to comment that what you are doing is a way to do that. Like, I really want to just shout out what you're doing here. I mean, this is like one step in that direction. And Zuli, what you're doing too is amazing. I mean, that platform and that resource is just really great. So, I mean, what you guys are doing, I think we need more students and more people to do that sort of work.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I wanted to add on to that because I think coming to grad school, I think I was in a really nice bubble when I was in New York, very diverse. Where I worked, there was a lot of Latinx representation, and I think I assumed that was the norm. And when I got to MICA, I was just not happy because there was nobody that I could, in the faculty, there was really nobody that could understand the projects that I was making. And I think I didn't realize how, I didn't predict how hard that could be. I think just things would be overlooked, things would be sort of then nitpicked at because they didn't understand. And I think it wasn't until my second year that this Professor Elaine Lopez joined the faculty, where I realized oh, there's a huge difference when there's representation in faculty. And I think the best advice I could give is make that space and foster these safe environments, propose an exhibition, calling all artists. If you don't see people in the faculty, then look to your cohorts, look to your coworkers, and try to make these connections with one another, because it doesn't have to end there when there's nobody in the faculty or leadership role.
Very true. Yeah. Something that I remember from your interview, Zuli, was that you said, don't make a project about the problem, but make it about the solution. And that really stayed with me. Okay, moving on to the next and final question before we open it up to Q&A from the chat. So this question was asked to all of you during your interview, and it was wonderful to hear your responses. So I thought we could conclude this part of the panel talking about what Latinx creatives inspire us. From music to films to writers and everything in between, what Latinx creatives inspire you? Free for all, you can go for it.
So I'm not gonna name them, but I rather just, because I made a huge list actually of people that I get inspired from, and I even included the links. So I just I'm putting that into a Google Drive, a shareable link, and I'll just put it on the comments under the YouTube live. But it's just a bunch of creatives that I think are amazing and have helped me and my other Antonio and Diego, develop our projects as well. And, people overall that are just creatives, amazing creatives. So, yeah.
Amazing. Thank you for making that.
I think for me, it's been not looking at design recently. I'm kind of done with design, looking at it. I love it, but I'm kind of done. We need to look at other people. We need to look at other places. There's other fields, there's other thinkers that have actually been there all along, But you know, it's the joke I have of like, some people need to go on a cruise ship, and I maybe shouldn't even make that joke right now, but like some people just need to be sent on vacation for a time and then let others take the space. So, you know, for me, I think, again, I mentioned Chimamanda, that the danger of a single story, listening to that and actually showing it to students. I've used it twice to teach with, and students just get floored by it. It's always, you have to take a break when they realize what she's talking about. I think I've encountered this performance artist in New York, Josefina Baez, which I never knew about her. She lives in New York City. She's been making work forever. And it's got this incredible methodology to talk about making work. And just, I think looking at other, like people that I haven't read before, I just got a bunch of Octavia Butler books, lots of African-American writers and artists who are really just have always been doing incredible work. Leguizamo was incredibly influential, and I've seen all his shows, but when I saw Latin History for Morons at the Public in New York, I went and I had to have some drinks because I was like, oh my God, I have no idea. But then the question he poses in that is the same question. What do you do when your child comes up to you? He has a history project. You don't even know your own history, and you were born in Latin America. Like, that's a shame, right? So it speaks to a lot. So I think, I mean, there's so many, but I really think that there's just other people that we need to give the floor to. I'm going to start listening. Celia is in my brain now. Thank you, Yara. Celia is there. Azúcar. So I'm going to like just go listen to Celia and play Celia left and right. So yeah, there's just so many people. The list is on and on and on and on and on. And now I'm looking forward to that list.
I cannot remove my political sort of insistency. I'm highly, highly, highly impressed by Alejandra Ocasio-Cortez. And it's for me, for us, for every woman, for every single human being in the United States, it's a hope. And I always praise any single immigrant, regardless the country where they're from or the country where they try to settle in, because of the difficulties. Every single immigrant that makes it in any other country, it's somebody that I absolutely treasure in any field. It could be science, it could be sports, arts, politics, music, I mean, any of the arts. It's somebody I definitely get absolutely inspired by.
Very true. Well, this has been so amazing talking about all these different people. Esto ha sido increíble, colección de inspiración. We will now take a couple of questions from the live chat on YouTube. So for all of you guys listening, manden sus preguntas. I'm here to translate them to you guys. So we have one for Yara. Is her work shaped by everything she's passionate about and she blends them all together? Or has she discovered things she loves after developing her work? That's from Patricia Morales.
That's a really great question. It's both. So I always start from the inside out. So things that are calling me naturally, I'll lean into those things and fall into a tunnel of falling in love with those things more and more and more until I understand why I love them. That's what happened with film when I was very young. I never studied filmmaking, but I was dancing at a very young age. And I remember seeing, you know, my first film, and I understood it through a lyrical movement lens. And then from then on, I just became obsessed with film and I couldn't stop watching film. And that then I realized my language for film would be different. And then I started using some of the things I understood from dance into my film and theater, into my film language. So really it was following the things that were naturally calling me. I often, speaking of the last question and this question together, I often look to music and Celia and La Lupe and like really melodramatic female singers that embrace their intensity and their vulnerabilities as strengths, as opposed to things that are used against them. So they, and telenovelas too, I really love telenovelas, although it's very problematic, but I have to say, like, still the temperature of them is really attractive to me. So it's really sort of like textures, sounds, characters that are calling me, that I really am in love with, that feed me in a way that is deeper than just guilty pleasure, but it's deeper. It's like a deep satisfaction. And those things are true to then probably something that's vibrating deep inside of me. So then I can then tell a story in those spaces because those are the spaces I'm in love with. And then I'll learn how to do it. So I'll learn how to edit film, and I'll learn how to, I don't shoot my own work. I work with DPs and cinematographers, but I'll find ways, if I love it enough, I'll find ways to know how to make it happen. But it really starts from a place of love for something. And from the love comes ease. And yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. Okay, so now the next one is for Ramon. How does your culture influence the way you teach, what you teach, and also do you want your culture to have that much influence?
How does my culture influence the way I teach, what I teach? I think that's all up for grabs right now because I think I'm in a shifting place where I'm going away from teaching what I think or what has been deemed as what design students are supposed to know. Again, sort of that European canon and that putting Europe, you know, as the standard for everybody else when that's not the case. I think I can't separate my culture from myself as much as maybe at times I possibly have tried to, because maybe it wasn't deemed as, you know, like as good. There's a lot, I think there's a lot of insecurities in dealing with working with being a person of color teaching in design. Design has a really nasty little history, and not just design of like putting our ideas and ourselves as like you're not good as somebody else. So a lot of people of color, not just Latinx, have had to deal with that. So there's a lot of insecurities, but I do feel that it is my responsibility to actually foreground some of my Latinx, some of that out here, because if I don't do it, who's gonna do it? If you don't do it, you know, I don't know how people are gonna get to it. I don't know how students are gonna encounter it. I don't know how other Latinx students, how other African-American students, how other students from other parts of the world get the value that they can talk and do the work they wanna do about the things that matters to them, and not just make another poster about some film festival in the mountains of France. Like, it's just, you know, like that's, you know, I want the students to see other perspectives and other people. I don't know if that totally answers the question, but it's a really good question, but I actually thinking about it, yes, I do want my culture to have that much influence. It should, you know, like, why not? Why, like, you know, I'm tired of seeing my culture reduced to a footnote in a history book, whether that's art or history. You know, like, we're not a footnote. We're not a one-page sequence in our history book, you know? So, yeah.
I love that. We're not a footnote.
Yeah.
That's a great note to leave it on. Bueno, eso es todo el tiempo que tenemos por hoy. Each of these panelists deserves so much more time to dive into their work. Their websites are located in the description, so make sure to look further into their practices. Muchas gracias a todos los panelistas for participating, President Bronnett for being with us, y a la gente watching on YouTube donde están en el mundo. It has been a pleasure to talk about Latinx creativity with you all this evening. If you would like to hear the individual interviews I had with all our panelists and other professionals, you can go to my website, mariauseche.com, where they will be up once my thesis has been completed. Que tengan buenas noches and stay safe, everyone.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Buenas noches.
Ciao.
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 Bye.
Bye. Those, you guys can hang up. There we go. Cool.